Hello and welcome to the F1 Downcast with my partner in crime, Tyler. I am Caolán. Tyler, how are we feeling on the first race week of the season?
Absolutely freaking excited. It's time. It's time. We've waited way too long.
I cannot wait. Though Australia being the first race of the year kind of happens at crazy times in the US, it's actually perfect for me because I'm a graveyard shift person, so the race starting at midnight on Saturday night, Sunday morning is kind of perfect for me.
I mean, I've been known to stay up late a time or two to watch Formula One. Am I successful in completing the race? No. But I do try to stay up. It's when it gets to like the 3 o'clock starts or the 4 a.m. starts that's like I'm not waking up that early, but I also can't stay up that late because I'm old. So
Insomnia is a wonderful thing. I can usually watch no matter what time it is. Though I do admittedly kind of hate the US races because they'll start in the middle of the afternoon, which is normally my nap time. So,
with the exception of Vegas.
yeah, Vegas starts at good times for me.
Although they bumped it up an hour earlier this year, so yeah.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I don't think it'll make that much of a difference, but that's me. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll see.
So before we get into race weekend, this was also the release of Drive to Survive. And boy, do I have some opinions. And I imagine you do too.
Oh, definitely.
So, and I preface this by there's a lot of people who are long-time Formula One fans, which I include myself in. I feel like one of the cool things about you and I is we're both forms of the kind of typical now F1 fan base where you have the long timers who have been in this before the explosion through Netflix. And then you were one of the people who came in around the Drive to Survive era in the COVID lockdowns and when everything got really popular during that time period. So it's cool because we have both dynamics.
Yeah.
And but I am one of those people that I actually really liked Drive to Survive when it started. There were a few hokey things and stuff like that, but for the most part, up until the last couple years, I have really enjoyed Drive to Survive. This year may have pissed me off more than any other year.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think I started I started getting into Formula One for the second season of Drive to Survive. And you introduced me to that, and I was mildly aware of Formula One. But I was a very much a newbie person, so I was only able to basically watch Drive to Survive at that point. And I would Google the result of the races when I remembered there was a race. And I really loved the first, 2 or 3 seasons of Drive to Survive. That really turned me into a Formula One fan, not because it was on Netflix, but because it kind of gave you a more deep insight into Formula One. And for me and my ADHD brain, that's really helpful. I love to learn and actually become, yeah, identify things within the thing that I'm interested in. Um, so I really enjoyed the first couple seasons. I would
So,
say I haven't so much the last few.
so here's my problem, and it's kind of twofold, and I feel like it's pretty simple, and I don't understand why Netflix doesn't get this. And for reference, and so I have a media degree. My final project in college was actually pitched to people on the board of Netflix.
Oh shit!
Um, I have experience with one of the actually two of the people who select content for Netflix and work on content with Netflix. I've had extended conversations with two of the people who are or were on the board there. So I understand some of their philosophies through those conversations. And I understand some of the point. So I say that the preface that I'm not just coming to this from a place of the hey, I want to see this fan kind of thing. Like I do understand some of the business of it and some of the importance of getting the casual person into it, and I have
Yeah.
zero problem with that.
Same. I mean, I'm not in a media background, but I am a business owner, so I understand the
You know,
business aspect of it.
so my frustration is the drivers have been very adamant, including your four-time defending world champion. Hey, quit fabricating stories. You know, we understand, hey, it's a business, we have to do this. We allow you access to private meetings, private areas, private situations under the
Private conversations too.
yes, under the assumption that you will be honest about what there is. And they're not being honest. And part of my frustration is there are some good episodes. Um, I think both myself and other people have pointed out the Singapore episode's great.
Yeah.
I think they did a really good job with the Singapore episode. For the most part, the first episode of the season was pretty well done.
The last episode was also really well done.
I was kind of 50-50 on the last episode. I felt like they
just had it. They tried. They didn't have enough time to put everything in to make it make like full total like completion.
yeah, they skipped some important details, I thought, but fine, whatever. But there are a couple episodes that just absolutely pissed me off. There's no other way around it. It legitimately pissed me off.
The one where George won and they didn't say that he got DQ'd because of the weight of the car.
Yeah, and it didn't fit the narrative, I guess. And it's like, look, you know, it's a minor infraction that he got in trouble for, but this is F1.
That still
Minor things
matters.
win races, and
Yeah.
he won the race. And
And
Drive
then
to
didn't
Survive
win it.
makes it looks like Mercedes got a 1-2 in this race. And it's like, no. Lewis won that race, and George Russell finished last because he got caught cheating. Whether that cheating was on purpose or an accident or however you want. The fact is, his car weighed less than the legal limit, which helped to make it faster.
And
There's a
that's a
reason there are
super
rules.
important. Yeah, and that's a super super important part of it. Like to
Especially on
not.
a track like Spa.
Yeah.
Your
And
weight
like
is extremely important because you spend so much time at full throttle.
I think I'll put this out there now because I think everything I have to say is based off of this one statement. 10 episodes is not enough. There's too much in
It
the
would
season.
be if they didn't spend so much time on shit that didn't exist.
That's completely fair, but also to put it in perspective, even if you keep the shit that didn't exist, there are 24 races in the last season and this season. There's 10 episodes. That's not even half the amount of episodes that there are races. How can you actually accurately depict the things that are happening if you have to cram it into 10 episodes, but then also fictitiously add bullshit to the equation?
yes, yeah. It, obviously, my first frustration, my top frustration at least, is the Max and Lando stuff.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the media blew it out of proportions too. So, because
Well,
I
but
remember that
but
period.
at least that was at the end of the season, and some of that was fueled by actual things that happened. There, when they came together a couple times, and there was some issues in Mexico. Like if they create that narrative after Mexico, that makes sense because there was a little flashpoint there. They got over it quickly because they talked like humans about it afterwards. But whatever. But in Miami, and this is what annoys me as a Red Bull fan about Drive to Survive is for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because Max has been so critical of the series or just because they make good villains. Red Bull always gets shit on in Drive to Survive, whether it's their
That is
drivers,
true.
whether it's whatever, and they seem to especially love going for Max Verstappen.
And this season, Christian Horner too. I mean, admittedly, so he had allegations against him, but
At least that had a good reason coming into it, and Christian plays a good villain, so whatever. But they have been shitting on Max since season one when he was battling against Daniel, and it has never completely stopped. And the way they portrayed Max in Miami pisses me off because that's why there's a narrative that Max is like this angry, shitty dude.
he's really not.
They make it look like Max is all angry at Miami, and he went out and partied with Lando that night celebrating his win. He was as excited. I remember the joke at the time was that Max was as excited for Lando as if he would have won the race. Like
And I mean,
he was extremely happy that his best friend finally got his first Formula One race win. He took him out to party that night in Miami. Max took Lando out to party. Lando rides with Max on Max's private jet, including that night. And they're acting like Max is sitting in the cooldown room pissed off because they're using footage from other races where they actually had a bit of a flashpoint. That's nearly the end of the season. Zandvoort's in what, September?
yeah, yeah.
Miami's in May. They're going to the other end of the season when it's this huge flashpoint moment when Lando wins a Max's home race and kind of struck a nerve with Max by using what Max usually says post race on the radio in Max's home, and that kind of jabbed Max a little bit. So Max was a little bit pissy about it. And that's a whole different fucking situation. And to be using that to paint someone in a narrative that you want to paint them in, this is why you have Max being booed in London.
Yeah.
This is why you have situations where a lot of American fans think Max is a dick because he keeps getting painted as something that he's not because it's convenient for Netflix to have a villain and he's the closest thing they have to it.
I mean, I will give you some personal insight, and that's just because I've been to Europe and I've spent many, many, many months over there, and I've gotten to meet some Dutch folk, and they're wild in the best way, but also they're blunt, extremely blunt. They're don't any listener don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying Dutch folk are the same as Germans. They're not, but Germans also share that same type of intensity. They are just honest. They don't sugarcoat things. They don't try to bury their feelings in a bush and try to speak to you in a different way. Um, it's just that's just how it is, and I think Americans, especially, don't take that well because us as Americans, you and I, are so used to beating around the bush, not getting straight to the point, not being completely honest in either how we feel about somebody or how they made us feel. And I think that is kind of why Netflix paints him in that way is because that's how Americans identify things.
Well, and also you have the British element involved in that too, where the British media are used to people who say nice things in the media despite what they feel, and it
Max
really
doesn't do
rubs
that.
them the wrong way that he's just honest. And I don't know that I hate when they use things from other races to paint narratives that don't exist.
Yeah.
You remember the big controversy, was it last season, that they used radio from Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc about them having problems with each other, but they spliced radio from different races to make it look like that, and it's just like, and I
Not to
mean,
mention, not to mention, Netflix paid somebody to spend hours making it sound perfect.
yeah, it's so stupid, and I'm Max has already come out and said some things pretty annoyed with it. At least he did it with a sense of humor, but kind of pretty annoyed about the way they portrayed that stuff. And but also in as a Formula One fan in general, it really irritated me that Lewis winning at Silverstone wasn't really covered.
Yeah.
Like they showed in the background, but we all know how big of a deal it was for Lewis to finally win.
In that car.
In
Or in general.
in general, it had been he had went his first winless season ever. He he was having the worst stretch of his entire career. He had never gone this long. I think he like doubled the amount of races that he had ever went without a win, maybe even tripled it. Like it was pretty close. And then he comes to his home race for the last time in Mercedes
And wins it.
and wins that race. And it's just like a little side note, like, oh yeah, Lewis won this one. And it infuriated me because, look, yes, I have my fandom, but I also understand what things mean to the sport.
Yeah.
And for the sport of F1, that was a huge moment that year. Lewis winning at home in his last race for Mercedes was a big deal. It was an emotional thing for him, the team, and for the UK. It was a big moment, and to miss that, it's like, if you want a drama, that's an episode that writes itself.
Yeah.
Lewis's struggle to win. You know the way they covered the Leclerc curse at Monaco, like. How do you
That was
miss?
very well done too, by the way. That was actually really, really well
But
done.
that's what frustrates me is they show they can do those things. They just choose to go for the low hanging fruit most of the time.
Let me get some rant in because I'm foaming right now. So I agree with everything you've said, 100%. And like I said just a little bit ago, a lot of my thought is based on the fact that there needs to be more than 10 episodes. But for me, now being in a position where I consider myself a huge, huge F1 fan, obviously I'm a co-host on a podcast about it. I'm very involved in the community and I'm very involved in Formula One as itself. To not include things like sprint races is very damaging to F1 in itself because you'll get people that watch Drive to Survive, they'll start tuning into actual races, probably the ESPN televised ones, which have my own negative things to say about those streams, but uh and they'll tune into a race as a sprint race and they'll be super confused. But those sprint races, while they're kind of overall not important, they are kind of important in terms of points for the season. And to not even showcase that a little bit really irks me because they exist and there's quite a few races that have sprints. I'm not necessarily a fan of those weekends. I think the sprint races just complicate things, but to each their own. The fact that they continuously fabricate falsehoods in the show to keep whatever audience they're trying to achieve engaged, when naturally that happens in Formula One on its own, is complete and total bullshit. And they just need to do a better job of actually storytelling, because I feel like this last season it was kind of just like brushing the surface of a lot of important things, but deep diving into the things that really weren't that important. Like, let's put it into perspective. They didn't even mention Franco Colapinto. They did, I think, one or two times in the midst of a race. They showed a Colapinto crash, but they didn't mention anything about somebody being replaced.
He didn't get mentioned in the episode about the Red Bull driver carousel where Red Bull were actively courting him.
Exactly. Like, those things are massive, important things, because let's say you watch this season of Drive to Survive, right? And as you're new to Formula One, you hear all this talk about Jack Doohan and Colapinto being the reserve driver and how Doohan's going to get replaced and this and that. And you're like, well, who the hell is Franco Colapinto? He wasn't in Drive to Survive. That's a problem, considering a lot of last season was talk about Franco Colapinto.
Well,
And it's
well
like,
not just that. Look at all the rookies we have on the grid.
yeah. And the only one that actually got screen time or the only two that got screen time were Kimi Antonelli and Jack Doohan.
And Oliver Behrman became, I believe, the first rookie to score points for two teams
Yeah.
in the same season.
Yep.
His debut with Ferrari, which was amazing, last minute Saudi Arabia, one of the hardest tracks to fill in for somebody that's not named Monaco. And maybe it's actually as hard as Monaco because of the speeds required and the fitness level required to get through that race and it being early in the year. Nothing about Barrett. Nothing
No.
about Gabriel Bortoleto, who is one of the few drivers to win F3 and F2 as a rookie and is considered as possibly the most highly touted rookie, including Kimi Antonelli, because of his success, who is also a protege of Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen.
Yep.
He is very, very good friends with Max. And Max has kind of taken him under his wing, along with, Fernando managing him, which what a power group to have guiding you through your F1 journey. Hey, here's Fernando and Max getting me through my journey. That's amazing for him. But no mention of those guys.
There's so
Probably
many.
the two most important rookies not named Kimi, and they never got mentioned.
Yeah, and it's so much missed opportunity, especially because if somebody that's just now becoming introduced to Formula One through Drive to Survive this season, they're going to not know not a large chunk of the grid. Well, actually, it's a sizable chunk of the grid that are rookies, and the only two that were covered were Kimi Antonelli and Jack Doohan, and
One
we've
of who's not
spoken.
expected to be there for very long, and they
Uh,
don't even know that.
Exactly. I was going to say, we've alluded to that in previous episodes of our podcast where we're like, we don't think Jack Doohan's going to make it through the season. His testing was honestly better than we anticipated, for sure. But testing is testing, and actual racing is much different. Um, it's just such a missed opportunity to actually educate people, and it does so much damage to Formula One because people become confused.
And then, if you want drama, why in the absolute hell did we not have George Russell versus Max Verstappen?
Yes. Holy fuck yes.
The thing that was actually incredible drama, including the huge blowout that Netflix had cameras recording and didn't end up making an episode of.
But they used the footage of George dying in a fucking ice tub, which I found to be just completely inappropriate.
I don't mind, but
I just
show
think
more of that.
there's boundaries.
Show more reality. If you want to go pure reality, show more reality. I felt like, especially at the end of the season, one of the huge flashpoints that's leading into what's going to be the future, because George Russell is now the head of the Mercedes project, but also, as we talked, is a free agent if they don't sign him to a deal. The rivalry between Max and George,
It's still alive and going.
they don't get along at all.
No, he even came out and said something recently, like in the last couple of days.
That's not going. And nobody who didn't watch last season and is coming into this fresh will have any idea that there is a very long-standing problem between these two.
Yeah,
That
in the
got
American
ugly.
market, yeah, and the American market's not going to read deeply into it.
Well, it's like, if you want drama, if the goal of this show is drama, that's real drama. That actually happened.
They were on the verge of fist fighting each other. Well,
Why?
George was on the verge of fist fighting Max. I don't think Max was going to fight him back.
George was, as Ocon got to see really quickly, George would have got his ass whipped if he tried that. Max is not the one to play with in those situations, as Ocon found out.
And George ain't that tough.
No. He's a little posh princess. Netflix would have been watching him in another ice bath, but that's a whole different story.
Netflix also would have failed to show the fight for that too. So,
right. Anyway, so now that we've got our Drive to Survive rant out of the way, and I'm pissed at how much of my week I wasted watching that,
I wasted an entire day. So
let's talk about the actual cars doing actual things that aren't fabricated on track. Let's talk about Australia. So,
well, first it's race week.
Yes, finally a race week. I'm very excited.
Finally,
I'm excited because I have no idea what the hell's going to happen this year, and that's always exciting when you don't really, when you're coming into the season. It's like, I could see any of three teams winning the championship this year, at least in my mind, because I don't really think Mercedes has quite the car to challenge for the championship, but I can see Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren all being in that battle. So let's start off with our top 5 predictions. I don't really care about your predictions for qualifying. I want to know what you think the race is going to be. Who is your
I didn't even bother with the qualifying.
Yeah, who is your top 5 finishers in the race?
I'll start from 5th. And like I said, I didn't take qualifying into consideration or any of that. I just did top 5 at the end of the race.
That's where the points pay out. That's what we care about.
Exactly. So finishing in 5th, I have Charles Leclerc. Going in 4th, I have Mr. Liam Lawson. 3rd, I have, this could be controversial, maybe, I have Max Verstappen. 2nd, I have Lando. And then 1st, I have Oscar because it's his home race.
Ooh, we agree on absolutely nothing, and I love that. We don't have a single position that we agree on in that one.
I think that's the first time so far.
Let's hear your reasonings.
So, I think Ferrari is going to struggle a bit having 2 massively competitive humans on their roster. I don't foresee Lewis finishing top 5 in the first race with Ferrari. I'd say maybe 6th is honestly where I'd put him. But because Charles Leclerc has driven Ferrari for so many years, he has an understanding of at least how that car maneuvers in some type of way, and that's why I have him in 5th. But I think the given the fact that Charles Leclerc has always been kind of the number one driver for Ferrari, he's going to have some type of chip on his shoulder in some way that might affect his driving. I think Liam is ready to go. Like the dude is ready. He's excited. He's amped up. He's motivated. He's got a good teammate alongside of him. They seem to get along pretty well from what I've seen.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a problem with playing the second driver because his dream was just to drive for Red Bull. I think that's enough to get him in P4. He's been ready for this.
Okay.
Max in P3, because there have been talks and murmurings about how unsettled the Red Bull car is, and even Max coming out and saying he won't win the first race of the season himself. Um, and I struggled with the top three because I do feel like Lando and Max can switch positions really easily. I also feel like Max could end up winning Australia for sure. But with the way McLaren finished last year and winning the championship, not the drivers' championship, but the constructors, I think McLaren will take the 1-2 spot at the end of the race, and I think Lando will be second because this is Oscar's home race, and no matter what Papaya rules means, I think they leave that for us to interpret. I would be willing to bet that if it came down to Oscar and Lando being P1, P2, they would switch positions so Oscar could win his home race. But I think McLaren were stronger last year than I thought they would be. And obviously they won the constructors. And I think what they learned from last year only helped them make their car better for this year because their car wasn't atrociously crap, you know. So that's where it is. I'll go from the number one back down just to reiterate. Oscar number one, Lando number two, Max number three, Liam number four, and Charles Leclerc number five.
All right. Definitely have a lot we disagree on, which is good. I like it when we disagree.
It doesn't happen often.
Yeah, makes things more interesting. And Australia is kind of a weird track, so it creates a little bit of weird results. And that kind of made my predictions a little bit hard at times, but I don't know who's more interesting at this point. So mine, starting from fifth, I have Liam Lawson. Uh, Liam, I do agree with you. I think he's ready. I think he is a very fast guy who's very talented and good in everything. I don't know. Australia's been a problem track for Red Bull, whether it's just bad luck and reliability or performance. And it's just been one of those tracks that has not been kind to Red Bull lately. And some of that is because Perez couldn't stop crashing and Max's brakes decided to catch on fire last year. But just in general, especially Max. Max has always had bad luck at Australia, but I think Red Bull as a team have struggled at Australia the last few years. But I still think Liam will do well and lay down his first marker like, hey, I'm meant to be here. I think fourth will be Oscar Piastri.
Okay.
I do think the McLaren have the best car, but I'm still not 100% convinced on Piastri. I think he should be closer to Lando than he has been. And that worries me at times. some track he has some of the Carlos Sainz issues at Ferrari, where some weeks he shows up and he's so fast that you remember why everyone was talking about him. In some weeks he's kind of anonymous, and he's there as the second driver.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be one of the weeks where he's a bit anonymous and he's the second driver and ends up just kind of fighting with Liam for, fourth place kind of thing. My first little surprise, I guess, would be I have Lewis Hamilton on the podium.
Oh shit!
I think
I don't think that's controversial though.
I think a lot can be said about a happy driver and a car that's somewhat easy to handle. I don't think Ferrari have a podium car, but I think Hamilton will be able to put it on the podium. I think Hamilton is the happiest I've seen him since probably 2018. After, he won the championship when Nico retired and he had Bottas as a teammate who pretty much purely became the second driver at Mercedes the moment he stepped in. And Lewis kind of had a nice walk to the title, and it looked like he felt great about life. And Lewis looks extremely happy right now. He's enjoying Ferrari. He looked pretty good in testing. Nothing that screamed, hey, I'm going to fight for a title, but a happy driver can do a lot for pace. And Australia's always been a track that Lewis has been really good at. It's a track that sometimes the car performance doesn't show what it's going to be like for the whole season. It's one of those anomaly tracks. And I just have a feeling Lewis is going to have a really good race. And I think he's going to put himself on the podium. Second place.
He does.
Second place.
I really hope he does. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Second place, I have Verstappen. I don't think Red Bull have a car to win. Not yet. And not at this track. I think I would love to be like, I think Max is going to come out of the gate firing. I think Red Bull are just trying to be close for the Spain rule change that will, in theory, benefit them, because once it was the flexi wing being allowed and teams going down that development path when Red Bull thought it wasn't going to be allowed, so they didn't go down that path. That was the turning point of Red Bull no longer being the fastest car. And I have a feeling when that rule change kicks in Spain, it's going to benefit Red Bull more than it's going to benefit other teams. So I think Red Bull is in a point of let's just keep it within a winnable margin until Spain. And I think that's why Red Bull spent most of their testing time doing experimental setups instead of long runs. I think they're trying to find the best way to get this car into a window. But I don't think they're going to get that race one. I think Max will be fast because it's Max Verstappen. I think the car will be decent. It's better than last year's. But I just don't think it'll be fast enough to beat Lando. And Lando is who I have in P1. I think McLaren is by far the fastest car right now. I think Lando is starting to realize what it's going to take for him to be a champion. And some of that is going to be stepping up and having a bit more aggression. And this is going to be a big start to the year for McLaren. Lando has to come out firing. You have to put away Max early, because if you don't, he's going to win. You have to give yourself if I'm McLaren, I want a 50-point gap by Spain in the drivers. I need 50 points by Spain, or I don't know. I feel confident winning the championship. So I think Lando is going to know how important it is to come out strong, and he's either going to excel or he's going to bin it or something bad. But I'm putting a little bit of faith in Lando. I think he's going to start out strong. I don't know how he'll react when the pressure gets heavier throughout the year, but I think at least in the beginning, he's going to come out strong and he will be on the top step in Australia. So that's
I think that that's really good, actually. Yeah, like I think we both shared the same teams in the top five. We flopped Charles Leclerc for Lewis, but I think your points about Lewis are really great. I think the only, and I mean, the happiness of Lewis does make a huge impact. And he did put a Mercedes car that really wasn't podium worthy on the podium last season.
and
At fifth place.
I just rate Lewis really high. Like I I
I think he's
I
just been
think
burnt
people
out.
forgot what Lewis is. I think last year made people forget who Lewis is. And
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, he's a
like
7-time world champion.
and he's a guy who can, if you give him a car that's decent, he will get it to results. He will always punch above his weight if you give him a car that can handle him pushing in it. The Merc couldn't. The Merc was bad in every phase that was important to Lewis, especially things like corner entry, where the Ferrari is much better about corner entry, and that's where Lewis gets a lot of his speed from. He can be a little bit more aggressive with that car. I liked how aggressive he was in testing. People see some of the offs and they're worried. I'm not. I'm excited because Lewis feels like he can push. And if Lewis feels like he can push, that means Lewis likes the car. And I have a feeling he's going to have a really good season. I don't think he'll compete for the title or anything like that, but I think he'll have one of those seasons where he's going to be challenging Leclerc and that team.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna throw this curveball at you. There's a random last question that I came up with at the end of this that you
Ooh,
have no idea what it is.
ooh, I like that. So,
Uh,
all
so
right, then
yeah.
let's keep moving on to some of our other questions. Um, I'll actually give my answer to this one first because mine will be pretty quick. My driver of the day will be Lewis Hamilton. Um, I,
What?
for all the reasons that I've been talking about, I think Lewis is going to come out and lay his marker down for the season that he is Ferrari's new number one driver. And I think he'll do it with the trophy on the podium. And I don't know if he'll be voted driver of the day because of something that I'll get into later, but he'll at
I, I,
least
th-
be
I,
one of the
I
two contenders.
Who? Okay, so just a random quick. This is not the question I was talking about at the end, but who do you think will take fastest lap?
Uh, that's a little harder to say because now that there's no fastest lap point, people won't pit for it anymore. So,
It's less exciting to get.
yeah. Now it might just go back to being random like it used to be, where you have somebody who pushes hard on an outlap and all of a sudden gets it.
Damn
I
it,
don't.
Danny Rick.
I don't think it'll matter as much now. So, who has the fastest lap? I don't think will necessarily be who's actually quick. You could have a Haas with the fastest lap because they
That's
do
true.
an alternate strategy and end up on the soft tire or something. They're kind of known for weird ass strategies.
That's fair. That's fair.
So who's
I
your
could
driver of the day?
our Aussie king Liam Lawson,
Hmm.
and there's a meaning. There's a reason behind it, and it's
Though if you call him Aussie, he's gonna stab you.
Yeah, because he's a Kiwi. He's New Zealand, but still.
Yeah.
Uh, Kyle, if you're listening, I love you. Uh, so drive, and this is just solely based off of just how many people have pulled or became Formula One fans because of Drive to Survive. And so I feel like there will be a decent amount of folk that have not really watched Drive to Survive or like watched a Formula One season prior to, but Drive to Survive put a big emphasis on Liam Lawson
That's
this
true.
last season, and so I can imagine his first race for Red Bull, him winning Driver of the Day, purely. Not to say that he's going to be terrible. I think he's going to fucking crush it. But I think he'd win Driver of the Day, actually win Driver of the Day, purely based on audience watching.
I love that we both took emotion of the audience into consideration for ours.
That's all that DTS caters to.
Yeah. I just love like, oh, now the driver of the day, because driver of the day's fan voted, like we're definitely taking that into
Like,
which makes sense. If Lawson does pull out a P4, I definitely could see him getting that, because I think that's more than a lot of people expect from him, especially in this Red Bull.
yeah, and I mean, to be honest, I would have loved Danny Rick even without Drive to Survive, but Drive to Survive really, really made me love Danny Rick. Like, he is my favorite driver, and he might not be the greatest. Obviously, he was kicked out in after Silverstone last season, but I love Danny Rick, and that is a product of Drive to Survive because of how they showcased him, but also how he portrays himself outside of Drive to Survive. It's not just, oh, I'm going to be this guy in Drive to Survive. Like, no, Danny Rick is just Danny Rick. He's just
Well,
awesome.
well, and I remember from when he and Max were teammates together. Uh, the Red Bull content pool used to put out some amazing videos with him and Max, whether it was like the
Yep.
Christmas Secret Santa videos or just some of the random stuff they did in Monaco or Spa. They had a lot of good content of them being hilarious, and
One of my
it's hard
favorite
not
pieces
to
of
love them.
content. Yeah, one of my favorite pieces of content is Danny Rick falling into the pool in Monaco.
Oh yeah,
Like, forever legendary.
I'll still never
Just
forget the first time Red Bull got on. I, I believe it was the podium at Monaco, and Christian Horner had made a joke, before the race that he'd jump in the pool at the Red Bull Energy Station naked if they did, just assuming it wouldn't happen. And then it happened, and he actually did it, just wrapped in a Red Bull flag. And it was like, holy shit, this is that team. Like, these are my people. And I
can,
remember content like that. The pool at the Red Bull motorhome has such a history itself, in Monaco, of the drivers doing that. Like, hey, you have a win there, you jump in that pool. That's a tradition that they built, and it's pretty cool. And I I hope to see Liam Lawson do that this year.
me too. But also, can we petition or bring back shoeies?
Who knows? Maybe Oscar will bring him back if he wins.
I think Oscar's too conservative to do that.
Yeah, probably. So
Liam, even though you're a New Zealander, bring back shoeies.
he's crazy enough to do it.
Oh, for sure.
He's a firecracker. So that leads us into our lock of the weekend. And this one I'll go first again. My lock of the weekend is George Russell beats Kimi Antonelli in qualifying in the race. I think there is 0% chance that Kimi out qualifies and outraces George if George finishes the race.
This isn't mine, but I 100% agree with you. 100%.
Yeah, I just I may not like George very much as a person, but it is impossible to ignore his speed.
Yeah.
And I don't think Kimi can match that at this point, at least. And time will tell if he can match that in general. But
definitely not first race of the season.
yeah, and definitely not in that extremely tricky Mercedes that doesn't look like it's particularly fast or good. I think that's going to be a tough car to drive. George is a little bit used to its tough characteristics and how to drag it to a result. I don't think Kimi is, and I don't think it's a big challenge for Kimi going in a difficult car at a difficult low grip track that's basically a street circuit against an extremely fast and complicated and confident teammate. I just who is also the clear number one driver in that team right now. I just
and
think,
who's also podiumed in that car.
yeah, I
agree
just,
with that.
yeah. What is your lock of the weekend?
I have two, but the first one really doesn't count. The first one is some type of positive remark about how good Drive to Survive was by commentary. That's the less serious of the two, but it's gonna happen, and it's gonna make me cringe. The second one is actually the serious one, and the lock of the weekend for me is both Williams drivers finishing in the top 10 for points.
I think that's a fair one. I
Yeah.
could agree with that one.
Yeah, 100%. Like there, I mean, there are a million ways that it couldn't happen. I don't foresee it not happening.
Yeah, that's a track that they're usually fast at and good at when Albon's not putting it in the wall and Sargent's not putting it in the wall
And now we don't
whoever
have
else.
Sargent, so
Yeah,
at least my odds are 50-50.
yeah, I agree with you there. They have a decent car, and that's a track they do well at, even when the car is not decent. So,
And they have decent drivers.
I would say
They
more
really
than
do.
decent.
Yeah. Like obviously they have Carlos Sainz, but I think Albon is more than decent as well. Is sometimes the circumstances aren't right.
That's fair.
What about what do you want me to go first, or do you want to go?
Yeah,
First?
let you go first for shock of the weekend.
All right. So my shock of the weekend is I'm not even gonna say the whole freaking team name because it's just obnoxious. So many of the team names this year are just obnoxiously long. I'm gonna say my shock of the weekend is that both Racing Bull drivers finish in the points.
Hmm.
And it's a shock because I don't foresee that happening.
Yeah, I don't know if either of them will get in the points in my. All right, that would surprise me. I'd be surprised if one of them got into the points. So both of them in the points would.
If one of them makes it, it's for sure it's Yuki.
Mm,
I don't have the confidence in Isaac Hadjar to get into the points in his first race with Racing Bulls. I don't.
Hadger is extremely fast. It's just whether or not he can manage tires and manage himself.
But the
Speed
Racing Bulls
wise, I
car
think
is
he has
not fast. The Racing Bulls car is not fast.
that's the scenario why I don't
and
see
and,
it.
and then you push the car to the fullest potential and you'll wreck it because it can't handle that. Like I don't foresee. I could see Yuki potentially getting P10, maybe, but I don't see Isaac Hadjar being in any of the top positions in the first couple of races.
We
That's why
both
it's a shock
agree,
to me.
which means he'll probably win the race.
I honestly, bro, if that happens, I'll have to think of something to do to like That's crazy. I don't even know. I'll go
I'm not
skinny
even
dip
going
in
to
a
bother to think of
pond.
something because it's not happening.
I'll go skinny dip in a pond in somebody's private property.
Oh, I don't know what to do. That's risky. But, so my shock of the weekend, and I guess I think it would be a shock. I think it qualifies, but I'll see if you agree. I think Signs outperforms both Mercedes.
I agree with that.
I think Signs drags that Williams up to best of the rest. I think he finishes most likely sixth or seventh. But I would most likely have Leclerc in sixth, just outside of the top five. And then I think best of the rest is going to be a fight between Williams and Alpine. And I just trust Signs a little bit more at that track just because Australia has been really good to Williams. If you remember, last year until Albon had his wreck, he was looking like he was going to be at least in sixth and maybe trouble the top five. Like he had extreme pace. He was fighting on the back end of the top 10 and looking like he had the pace to go forward if things worked out his way. I think Signs in an improved Williams in a year where some other teams haven't improved, or at least haven't improved in as much of a step as I feel Williams have. Now, granted, Alpine looked really good in testing. They surprised me in testing, but I just rate Signs so high as a driver that I think he'll be able to drag the Williams above the Alpines and above the Mercedes. And I kind of wonder if Mercedes are fighting with Williams and Alpine for best of the rest right now. Because
Mm.
because their testing kind of showed to me that they have the same problems with their car. Because they were the fastest car in the cold again. And last year their problem was they destroyed their tires because they
In the
got
warmer
too
seat,
hot.
in the warmer weather. Yeah.
Yeah. They couldn't manage tire temperatures, which is why they dominated the weekend in Vegas when it was freezing, because they were the only ones who were able to get their tires hot. But as soon as they get at warm circuits, which Australia is going to be warm, I just think that car isn't good at managing its tires. And I really wonder if they're going to be fighting with Alpine and Williams for who is the best of the rest instead
Fighting with
of being
Ferrari
a
and everybody
clear
else.
top four. I think there's going to be a top three and a very close next three trying to fight for who gets in that top group.
I could agree with that 100%. Yeah. But on the topic of Mercedes, um, and we touched last episode on Susie Wolf potentially running for FIA president,
As
and
sad as
briefly
I am
touched.
that that's not happening.
Did they deny it?
Yeah. She has come out and said that. Well, sources close to her have come out and said that she has absolutely no interest in being the FIA president.
Claire Williams, Claire Williams, Claire Williams, Claire Williams. Uh, that's not even the subject of the conversation, but let's go for Claire Williams, please. Um, Based on the last, and that's new information to me actually. But based on the last episode, we talked about Susie Wolf potentially running for FIA president and Toto stepping down from being team principal of Mercedes AMG F1 or Mercedes AMG Petronas F1 team or whatever. They're all too long. Uh, what is the life expectancy of Toto Wolff's team principal career? When do you think he'll retire?
Ideally, I would say after the regulation change. I think he'll lead Mercedes through the regulation change. I think you start looking at possibilities of him going into a more senior role. Like, I don't think it'll be a Toto gets fired or steps down thing. I think it'll be Toto moves to a more senior role within the Mercedes organization itself, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I would say probably a lot of it would depend on if they get the 2016 regulations right. If they come out and they're not fighting at the top, I think it's more likely that Toto moves into a more senior management role and
At
is
what point? At what year?
the end of 2016.
2026?
Yes, that year. That's the one of those years that ends in a 6.
Okay. That makes sense. It's close to what I had in mind.
I don't think
So
you I don't think you risk taking him out of the role right now because you're so close to the regulation change and you can't change direction now. Whatever direction you're going is the one you're in. Like you have begun so I'll go off on a little tangent here, but a lot of talk gets made of upgrades this year. But I think the thing that people don't realize is I don't think people understand how long the upgrade pipeline is. That your upgrades for the year are planned very far in advance. And a lot of F1 teams will have planned the first half of the season upgrades before they got out of testing. They know what their development schedule is like and are already developing those elements. And the truth is, when the calendar hit 2025 and they were allowed to work on next year's car, a lot of development stopped. But a lot of that was already planned up into a certain point. And in the general cutoff point seems to be for a lot of teams Spain, because that's when the rule change comes in for the flexi wings. And I think that is a good point of when I don't think you will see many cars have updates after Spain. And if you do, it's ones that were already done in case something didn't work or as a B spec. I don't think you will see very many updates, if any, no significant updates at least after Spain, because all the resources have to go into 2026 because you have to plan those things so far in advance. Formula One isn't a month turnaround sport.
No.
It is we've been working on this project for 4 months. Here's the upgrade that finally became as a piece of that. And so you are already waist deep in your 2026 car by the time you hit testing. So you are now so far into that process, I don't think you remove your principle.
No.
Until you have seen how that process plays out.
Yeah.
And that's why I think Flavio was brought into Alpine when he was last year. They didn't wait till the end of the year because they wanted to make sure he was involved in the process of building for 2026, which meant they needed to bring him on at the latest midway through the season and they even chose earlier than that, because there is so much involved in that development process. And I just I don't think they do anything with Toto, or Toto does anything until they get a good read on what happens in 2026.
Okay. So the earliest I have Toto departing, or not departing, but taking a more senior position within Mercedes, is 2027. Reason being, he petitioned so hard for Kimi Antonelli. And that is, Kimi Antonelli is Toto Wolff's Max Verstappen. At least how it's been portrayed, and how he talks about Kimi Antonelli.
Oh, 100%.
I can imagine Toto, the earliest he would take a senior role and not be team principal anymore would be 2027.
And I think that would take the car being bad.
Yes. I would naturally assume Toto takes a step back or up, depending on how you look at it, in 2030.
If the car is good.
If that's what that's the longest. That's the
Yeah.
longest. That's saying the car is good. Kimmy's doing great. Whatever.
Well,
I don't foresee Toto wanting to kind of relieve himself of the team principal role after petitioning so hard for Kimi Antonelli, kind of changing the rule a little bit with Red Bull, mind you, to bring Kimi into Mercedes. And to not stick around long enough to actually see the fruits of that grow.
I agree 100%. And, you know, to add to your point of seeing Kimi as a Max Verstappen, I don't know if you've seen it, but F1 actually put out a really good piece this week. I watched it last night, and it was about a 20-some minute video about how basically Mercedes missing on Max Verstappen in the chain reaction that ended up leading Lewis to Ferrari. And they go through the whole chain reaction, kind of basically explaining that they were in there with Max. Like, they really, really wanted Max, but they didn't have a seat to offer him. And they lost him because Red Bull had a seat and they didn't. Red Bull had a seat they could offer. They had Nico and Lewis. It was 2014, in their heyday. 2014, 2015 was their the beginning of their huge run. And because they didn't have a seat and Red Bull did, the Verstappens chose to become part of the Red Bull family. And Toto, and especially Niki Lauda at the time, while he was still alive, was very high on Verstappen and really, really wanted him. And they had nothing to offer him in F1, and they lost him. And look what Max has gone on to become. So that fear of doing that again kind of led them to push Lewis out of the door. And proof of what Drive to Survive could do if they actually cared. Formula One did an amazing piece on this and showing the chain reactions and some really good interviews with everyone involved in the process. I have to send it to you tonight if you haven't seen it.
I mean, I could just log into the F1 account and watch it. I'll probably do that over dinner.
Yeah, it's a really, really good watch. I watched it last night also over dinner, and yeah, it's a really good watch of Toto trying to learn from his Verstappen mistake, of, if you see a guy that looks generational, you have to make some sacrifices to assure that that guy doesn't end up dominating the sport in another team. Even if that means sacrificing your team's hero and the guy who helped you get to the platform you're at now.
That sort of implies that Toto wasn't as surprised about Lewis's Ferrari move as everything has made it seem.
Well, we touched on it a little bit last week, but Toto kind of caused it. The fact they didn't want to give Lewis a long-term contract because of Kimi Antonelli
That is true.
is
Yeah,
why Lewis
actually.
left.
Yeah.
They wanted to give Lewis a 1-1. Lewis wanted a 2-1. And the reason why they were only given the 1 year with another option of a year is they wanted to try to put Kimi in something like a Williams or somewhere just to make sure he was as fast as they think he is. And then if he was, bring him in. And Lewis wasn't born last night, and he understood that's what was going on and decided, all right, I can read the writing on the wall. I would rather jump while I have all the power than wait till I have none of the power, because that's what happened to Sainz, and that's how Sainz ended up at Williams. Is Sainz had to find a team when he had no power, and really had to choose between three teams that are kind of a toss-up on if any of them become a top team. So I think Lewis smartly took his career into his own control once he realized that he wasn't the long-term plan anymore, and that he wasn't even the secondary plan anymore.
That makes sense.
So I actually think Toto has a lot on the line this year and next year to be the one who forced out Lewis for this young driver that is very highly touted, is fast, checks a lot of the boxes. If he doesn't become an absolute superstar and Lewis does well at Ferrari, there's going to be some questions right away. And I think that's why Mercedes has been quick to manage expectations of like, hey, we know it's going to take a year. Like that, we brought him in this year so he could get comfortable. They're really lowering the expectations of what Kimi will be, because I think they know there's a lot of that pressure, because everything Kimi does will be compared to Lewis this year. Everything.
Which is super unfortunate for Kimi.
Yeah.
that is a terrible position to be in.
Yeah, you're the guy replacing Lewis, and you're the reason Lewis was pushed out, whether in things that you had no control over, but that's the way the media is going to take it. That's the way the commentators are going to take it.
And the driver you're replacing is a decade and a half older than you.
And a 7-time world champion.
That was to be assumed, yeah.
Driving for the most popular brand in F1.
Honestly, one of the most popular brands in the world.
Yeah, and the fact that your existence is the reason Lewis is in red, people, no matter how much Mercedes tries to downplay it, the media won't.
No, and that's a lot of pressure for a 17-year-old.
It is, but well, now he's 18.
The year doesn't make a difference. That is an unfathomable amount of pressure to walk into your rookie season, to have the media say you're the reason Lewis is in red, and to also, even though he's not the number one driver, have to fill those shoes. I wouldn't want to be Kimi this year.
Well,
or the following 2 years.
And that's when you see what guys are really capable of.
I feel like that amount of pressure there's no make or break. That pressure, and for me, would just break me.
In theory, but if you're that strong, you'll figure it out. And especially when you're on the grid currently with the driver who holds the record for youngest race winner, who did it in, while his second season, his first race with a top team, fighting against some really talented people. And F1's cutthroat. Nobody cares about the reason.
Yeah.
Do you perform or do you not? That's why I've always liked the Red Bull approach. The Red Bull approach is very straightforward and honest. They only want drivers who they know can win races. If you if you can't win races, if you don't look like you're going to win races, you're gone. They don't want podium finishers. They don't want
They want race wins.
yeah. They want guys who, when they dropped Kvyat for Verstappen, the big reason Marco gave was, we want guys who can win races, and he doesn't. They didn't believe that he was capable of winning a race, which he didn't do with his time with Red Bull in the year and 6 races that he was driving that car. And I enjoy that approach because it's very transparent. You're either good enough or you're not. And some people don't like that about F1. I love that about F1 because it is outside of the backmarker teams who have pay drivers. At the top end, it's a very simple thing. Are you fast or are you not? And it's brutal and it's cutthroat, but I think that's the way it should be. You look at Carlos Sainz in his situation. Carlos Sainz is a fast driver, but he didn't look like a champion. And that's why they were willing to sacrifice him for a champion. And I enjoy that approach and that transparency, and that, look, if this is the pinnacle of motorsport. If you are not that top guy, your seat's always up for grabs.
Unless you're Lance Stroll.
Well, and that's why I put the preference in the back marker teams. The teams who are competing for the back end of the points, their scenarios are different because usually their financial situations are different, and they have to have some pay drivers and things like that. And that's how the Lance Stroll thing happened.
Well, also the teams at the back marker aren't competing for first place. They're competing for 6th through 10th.
Yeah, they care more about consistency than, hey, are you fast enough to win a race? Because they don't have a car that's fast enough to win a race. But they need someone who's not going to destroy the car. Let's make no mistake. Logan Sargent didn't get fired because he was slow. He got fired because he spent more time on the wall than the track.
And they'd cover that in Drive to well, maybe not Drive. No, I think they did.
Yeah,
they did. They covered that in Drive to Survive, where James is like, we went through this many parts, and it's only the second race of the season.
I was laughing because they actually had a snippet in that where he was more brutal than I have ever heard him be, where he's just like, I have a second, I'm pissed because I have a second driver that can't stay out of the wall. And I was just like, oh, I've never heard James talk like that before. And that was kind of like so it was all the chances that you were saying you had in the meter. Really, behind the scenes, you were pissed. You just didn't want to throw your driver under the bus.
I will say, before we try to wrap it up, Williams is a perfect example of a backmarker team doing the right things, putting the right pieces in place to now be considered to be in the top 5 teams.
Well, and that's where Williams should be. You know, I
The
was
history says they should be.
just talking about Max's first win and things like that. If you watch that 2016 season, Williams was a best of the rest car. They were the team in fourth place car.
Yeah.
With Bottas and Massa, they were a competitive team. Not a top team, but a competitive team that were that it was a shock when they weren't in the top 10. It wasn't a shock when they were. And now they have finally modernized things to where they can be that again. And I think that's kind of the difference in Williams is a team that ended up as a back marker because of mistakes made, a lot involving Patty Lowe being a terrible appointment, which shocked a lot of people because Patty Lowe was really thought of highly, and then he managed one of the most embarrassing things to ever happen in F1, where Williams showed up to testing in Spain with no cars, and Patty lost his job over it. And I think,
Rightfully so.
yeah, and I think the direction he took them down destroyed that team for a really long time. And they were already kind of going downhill to begin with because of their lack of infrastructure. And then Patty Lowe came in from Mercedes and had no idea how to run that team. And it was horribly evident on the inside and outside. You could tell that he jumped into the deep end and couldn't swim. And the moment someone, a team principal, a person in charge of a team in general, starts throwing the blame around other places, you know that they've lost it. And he was throwing a lot of the blame in other situations, especially for the testing incidents and things like that. And I think the big difference is Williams never meant to be a back marker, whereas some of these
No,
other teams
never.
are happy being back markers because they don't have the ability. Unless you're Aston Martin, where you have all the money in the world, but you, instead of building your own things, try to copy everyone else and then wonder why you are the second best of everything.
I think in Drive to Survive this season, because they had Claire in Drive to Survive, there were some moments where you could see the regret on her face of having to do what she did, having to sell the team.
Well,
because it was her father's team.
And I think Claire gets treated unfairly sometimes in F1 circles. I think she was in such a lose-lose situation with Williams.
Oh, 100%.
Because she didn't necessarily want to run that team. F1 wanted her to take over that team. F1 really pushed her into that role. And I mean, Frank wanted her to take over the team as well. But she was very hesitant. But people like Jean Todt were really, I think, partially the keeping it in the Williams family name, like having a Williams running Williams, but also having a woman running an F1 team. And I think it backfired horribly because it made her look bad at running a team that no matter who was running that team, it was going to be a disaster. They were so technologically and financially behind everyone else because Williams no longer had the infrastructure, or never had the infrastructure to be a modern F1 team, that she took the brunt of the blame for something that she was managing the best she could with the resources she had. And I feel like there's a few people in the paddock who know and have a lot of respect for her, but I think in a wider stance of ever having, one of those kind of roles in anything again. She'll never get that because of the stigma that got attached for how much of a failure Williams was.
Which is super unfortunate because she's so competent. And she really credentially is a perfectly suitable person to be a team principal or just involved in some larger capacity of an F1 team.
Yeah,
Like I truly believe that.
she's one of those few cases where nepotism actually still led to the most talented person to be running something.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
she was Williams Racing, and it does suck that she doesn't. I wish she still had some kind of role within Williams. I wish that was the case because I think she deserves that for the period that she got them through it, and the fact that like she got them into this relationship and this sale and swallowed a lot
And
of her own
now
pride and family pride to make sure that Williams had a future.
yeah. And now look at where they are.
Yeah,
She deserves something.
they're back to the ethos of what Frank believed in of we deserve to be up there with our legacy, and we should have some of the best drivers on the grid, and we should have involvement with some of the best people talent wise on both sides of the pit wall. Like they're back to that ethos a little bit, and it's hard not to be a fan of Williams as an F1 fan. Like
I agree.
regardless of personal fandom, it's really hard not to root for Williams as a fan of the sport because they were the last privateers.
Yeah.
They are the last connection. I know Ferrari is technically the oldest team, but Ferrari, for being a privateer, has turned into this massive global brand. Williams was
I mean,
still
they make the most expensive supercars on the
yeah.
planet.
Williams was still the garage team, and what they represent in F1 history and the legacy that they built, including having drivers like Senna, though some of that went bad, but the legacy that Williams has within Formula One, watching them rebounding, it is impossible not to root for it a little bit.
Absolutely.
And as deep as my Red Bull fandom is, there's a piece of me that wants to see Williams have some success because I think it's good for F1 to have Williams near the top. The way that it's always good for F1 to have Ferrari in contention. I think it's good for F1 to have Williams because it's such a connection to the history of what F1 was born on. That guy in the garage building this amazing machine and going out and testing its merit. That is what F1 was built on. And Williams is the last connection to that. The last private name team, the last privateer that wasn't a constructor, and even though they're no longer that, their legacy is still the only connection left to that era of F1. Because by that point, Ferrari was Ferrari. Ferrari was no longer the guy tinkering in garages in Italy, and the group of people doing that was the 50s and 40s of what Ferrari then became. Whereas Williams developed through this golden age of F1 where you had the drivers so many of us always talk about, and these incredible battles that built what F1 has become, that really laid the groundwork. Because as important as the beginnings of F1 is, I feel like the most important eras of F1 were the 70s era and then moving to the 90s era of F1. I feel like those are the two big flashpoint eras of F1. And Williams was such a part of that late 80s, 90s era of F1 and what that became. You know, the people that have passed through that team, the Newies, the Sennas, like there are some impressive people who have worked for Williams and been a part of the Williams system. And I think they are so important to the legacy of F1 that it is nothing but a benefit to F1 for them to do good. And that makes it, as a fan of the sport in general, they kind of become that team that, like, all right, they're not my favorite team, but I like when they have good results.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think that that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah,
because we're at what, an hour and a half.
Yeah, longer than our usual episodes, but it's the week of the first
But-
race. We're excited, and there's a lot to talk about. So,
But also, like, we don't put time caps. We have an idea of what we think the episode should be, and I think both of us should know by now that that's just not how it works. We've been friends for a decade now, and over a decade at this point, and nothing that we ever plan is actually to the time that it's supposed to be. So.
yeah, that's what I love about conversation, is where it can lead, and when you're passionate about something. And we both have a deep passion for this sport, and weeks like this are always, this is my favorite week of the year. I love
Same.
the weekend before the first race of the year. There's so much anxiety and excitement and wonder about what's going to be. And this year, especially, because there's so much up in the air the year before the rule change. I know this time next year we're going to be even more like this because of how big the rule change is. But I'm so excited to see what the last year of these regulations are going to bring, if it's going to be as close as we all think it is. And this is act one of what's probably going to be a massive season for a lot of people's careers. And I'm just so excited to get it going.
Same. 100% same. I am so excited.
Well, next time you hear from us, we will be talking about the results of the first race of the year, the Australian GP, and going over everything that happened then. So look forward to you hearing our voices then, hopefully after one of us realizing that we were somewhat right about our predictions. Though the way F1 seems to be going right now, we'll probably both be extremely wrong, and someone we don't expect to compete will win the race, because that's the way F1 seems to be going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally ready to take accountability for being wrong. So,
so we can't wait to talk to everybody once we see the race results from this weekend. For Tyler, I am Caolán. Thank you so much for tuning in to the F1 Downcast.